Imagine being trapped in a world where the person you trust most could lead you to your doom. Today, we're diving into the 10 most dangerous cults and the horrifying secrets they hid from the world. These aren't just odd beliefs, they're dark paths that led to terror, tragedy, and death. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty and faith. Cults start off promising acceptance, family, a place to belong. But sometimes, what begins as a search for purpose descends into a nightmare of control, fear, and deadly obedience. These groups didn't just bend the rules of faith, they twisted them into something terrifying. These cults didn't just destroy lives, they devoured the minds and souls of everyone who trusted them. From isolation and manipulation to outright horror, each one demanded total loyalty. And as you'll see, that loyalty came at a shocking, deadly price. The People's Temple is a name forever linked to tragedy. Led by Jim Jones, this group promised equality and love but ended in one of the most horrific acts of mass murder-suicide in history. Imagine following a man who seemed to promise paradise, only to find yourself trapped in his nightmare. Jones convinced hundreds to leave everything behind and follow him to a secluded jungle in Guyana, where they believed they were creating a utopia. But in reality, they were cut off from the world, under constant surveillance, unable to escape. The paradise they dreamed of became a prison. In the end, Jones demanded they drink a poison-laced punch, leading to over 900 deaths. Can you imagine the terror of realizing that you're about to die and there's no way out? The people's cries, the chaos, a nightmare from which no one could awaken. Heaven's Gate promised its followers a way out of the suffering of this world, a chance to board a spaceship that would take them to salvation. But what they found was far from paradise. Their leader, Marshall Applewhite, convinced 39 people to commit mass suicide, believing they'd ascend to a new existence. Instead, they met only darkness. Applewhite claimed that the human body was just a container and that true salvation meant shedding it. Can you imagine the level of control it took to make people see death as freedom? In 1997, they took their lives, dressed identically, with bags over their heads, a final, eerie ritual of obedience. Even now, Heaven's Gate chills us. The eerie recordings of Applewhite's teachings, the cold sameness of their final moments, it's a haunting reminder of how deeply someone can control others, leading them straight to death in the name of salvation. Charles Manson built a family of followers, promising them love, freedom, and a new world. But he was slowly twisting their minds, molding them into his instruments of terror. When the time came, he sent them to commit one of the most brutal murder sprees in modern history. Manson used drugs, isolation, and psychological manipulation to bend his followers' wills. They worshipped him, believed every twisted word he said. Imagine being so brainwashed that you'd do anything, even kill, for a man who promised you the world but led you to horror. In August 1969, under Manson's command, his followers brutally murdered 7 people, including actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant. The sheer brutality of the attacks shocked the world. Manson's control was absolute, and his cult's violence left a scar on the nation. In Japan, Shoko Asahara convinced thousands that he held the secrets of enlightenment, but in truth, he was planning terror on an unimaginable scale. His cult, Aum Shinrikyo, launched a chemical attack on Tokyo's subway system, leaving commuters fighting for their lives in a haze of poison. Asahara's followers released sarin gas in the subway, causing passengers to collapse, suffocate, and die in agony. Imagine the horror of commuting one ordinary day, only to be struck by an invisible, deadly poison. For Asahara, it was just one step closer to his vision of a deadly apocalypse. Asahara didn't want peace, he wanted chaos. He saw himself as a prophet, leading his followers into a nightmare of violence. His promises of spiritual enlightenment masked a vision of destruction and terror, leaving Japan with a permanent scar. NXIVM presented itself as a self-help organization, attracting the rich, famous, and powerful. But behind the curtain, Keith Raniere was turning it into a dark, secretive cult, exploiting his followers and turning their faith into fear. Raniere created a secret society within NXIVM where women were branded with his initials and forced into submission. They believed they were joining something special, but what they were really joining was his personal nightmare of control and manipulation. NXIVM's members were sworn to silence, terrorized with threats, and psychologically broken. Only when survivors bravely escaped did the world learn the true, horrific nature of this so-called self-help group. David Koresh ruled the Branch Davidians with an iron fist, convincing them he was their only path to salvation. In 1993, this cult became the focus of a deadly siege that would end in one of the most infamous tragedies in U.S. history. Koresh claimed he was the chosen one, and his followers believed that he alone could lead them through the end times. He kept them isolated, ready for an apocalyptic showdown. To them, he was a savior. In reality, he was their prison guard. After 51 tense days, the FBI stormed the compound, and a fire consumed everything. The tragic end left 76 dead, including children. Can you imagine that moment, trapped, surrounded by flames, betrayed by the man you trusted with your life? This secretive cult operated in Europe and Canada, preaching that death was the ultimate ascension. Their leaders, Joseph D. Mambro and Luke Jurett, led their followers into ritualistic suicides, claiming they would journey to a higher plane. In 1994, police found 53 bodies arranged ritualistically, dressed in identical cloaks. Imagine believing so deeply that death becomes a passage, that your final act is surrendering your life to a leader's twisted vision of salvation. Witnesses described eerie rituals, where members wore cloaks and recited chants, convinced they were entering a higher existence. But in truth, they were falling deeper into a nightmare orchestrated by their leaders. Children of God, later known as Family International, twisted the idea of love into something horrific. Under David Berg's leadership, this cult preyed on innocence, trapping followers and children in a nightmare disguised as faith. Berg brainwashed his followers, justifying abuse with religious manipulation. Children were forced into unspeakable situations, and families were isolated, broken, and left to obey his every command. The trauma they endured is beyond words. Many survivors managed to escape, sharing stories of psychological torture, abuse, and lasting scars. Their bravery shed light on a hidden nightmare that abused the most vulnerable, revealing the darkest side of so-called faith. The Rajneesh movement, led by the charismatic Osho, began as a spiritual community but transformed into a dangerous cult. In pursuit of control, they resorted to poisoning hundreds of innocent people, showing just how far they were willing to go. Rajneesh's followers laced salad bars with salmonella to sway a local election, causing one of the largest bioterror attacks in U.S. history. What began as a promise of peace ended in paranoia, poison, and horror for an entire community. As the truth of the Rajneesh movement's crimes came to light, the utopian dream crumbled. This cult showed how easily ideals can turn into weapons, leaving a once peaceful community in ruins. Under Warren Jeffs' rule, the FLDS became a prison of abuse, secrecy, and control. Jeffs claimed to be God's voice, demanding blind obedience from his followers and enforcing twisted rules that left families torn apart. Jeffs controlled every detail of his followers' lives, from marriages to families, using threats and isolation to maintain his power. Those who dared to escape risked everything, leaving behind a life shrouded in fear and darkness. These cults don't just end, they leave scars that last lifetimes. Families torn apart, survivors haunted, and communities left with lingering shadows. They show us the terrifying power of devotion in the wrong hands. These stories reveal a disturbing truth: under certain conditions, anyone could be led astray. These cults are more than stories, they're a warning about the dangers of blind faith and the darkness that lurks in the promise of enlightenment. So, what do you think? Which of these cults chills you the most? Do you think anyone could fall under a leader's spell like this? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, we're curious to know which story shocked you the most. And if you're as captivated by these terrifying tales as we are, don't forget to hit subscribe. We have even more dark mysteries, unsolved crimes, and twisted histories waiting for you on this channel. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the truth is more horrifying than fiction. Stay curious, and stay safe.